What is a strange smell that takes you back to when you were younger? Here's one that happened recently. RC Cola. Technically this is a smell and a taste. My college roommate bought some RC and I asked if I could try one. I hadn't ever had an RC. Well, suddenly I had vivid memories of my grandparents' house. They would give me RC in little mouthwash cups because I was a tiny kid. I completely forgot this before I had some. Same. RC takes me straight back to West Virginia in the 60s and early 70s. If I smell RC, I can also smell my grandpa's musty old barn full of rusty farm implements. Cheiros, coconut scented suntan lotion, and chlorinated water always makes me think of amusement parks and water slides. This coconut oil suntan lotion to this day makes me happy and warm. Summer forever and the memories at the beach. When you come from a cold climate, there is nothing like that scent. Old books, damp and cigarette smoke. I grew up within my grandmother's house, and the place was full of them. Every room had at least 2 bookshelves, but most had more. The house really suffered from damp, and that combined with the cigarettes created this hyper-specific musty bookshop smell. There's a basement bookshop in London on Charing Cross Road that if I go into I almost immediately feel like I'm 10 years old again. The smell of school on the first day. I don't really know how to explain it. It just smells like pencils and paper and new books. I can imagine this exact smell right now. Okay, so I smelled opium one time a few years ago and I swear my great grandma's house growing up smelled like that all the time. That purple stuff the janitor used to sprinkle on vomit in the hallway. Smelled it at my kid's school and instantly knew what it was. We had a bug running through my 4th grade classroom. The nurse was full up, so after I bathed on my teacher's shoes, she had me put my head down and wait for my mom. James, the janitor, put down the purple stuff. My mom walks into the classroom, takes one whiff and says, "Man, I'd bath too if I had to smell that." Rotting seaweed. My dad would take us to the beach every spring break and summer. Anyone on the Gulf Coast knows Sargasso seaweed comes every year, sometimes excessively. It reeks, but we always had a good time anyway. Dried up, rotting seaweed on the beaches in Galveston, piled like wet tumbleweeds near the seawall and on the skimpy patches of sand. Sometimes the wind blows the right way and you don't smell it. That ladybug smell. Anytime I smell it I am immediately 7 years old, sitting in my room and looking out the window. Because when I was 7 ladybugs made a home in this fake planter in my room, so the smell was super strong and apparently stuck with me enough that all it takes is one ladybug near me and I can smell it. I too raided my son's new school yesterday. The library smell of old books hit me before I knew what room we were walking into. Thought this said tortured. Cigarette smoke and 7-Up smells like my grandfather's garage to me. We'd sit there and talk, watching whatever he could pick up on his tiny TV, while he smoked and I drank a soda. We're estranged now. Heck, I'm not even sure if he's still alive, but that smell can bring me back to better times. The smell of Christmas trees. I still love and appreciate the smell of my tree every Christmas season, but that smell just isn't quite the same smell from when I was a kid. Christmas was so much more special as a kid, and I miss it. The special Christmas magic comes back when you have your own kids, even more so, because there's something so much more special about providing the magic for them. The smell of gasoline and the rubber on things like tires. When I was little, my dad's stepfather, whom I called Papa, used to work at an auto parts store. I cannot remember the name, and I remember every Friday me and my brother would get picked up by my grandmother, and she would drive us to his work. I got so excited when we started getting closer to the place. I used to run out of the car and into the shop, where he would be waiting to hug us practically to death. He would be so happy to see us, and he would ask us what we did at school and such. I remember there being a sort of dirty, scruffy looking giant plastic dog or something in the front of the store which we would walk past, and then we would go into the actual garage where he worked. I can't explain it, but I can remember the place so vividly. Some of my happiest memories have been in that auto shop. Sadly, he passed away 6 or 7 years ago. I was crushed by his death. I was super close to him. His death is actually what motivated my dad to stop smoking. Every time I smell gasoline I get super nostalgic and emotional, and it takes a few minutes for me to collect my thoughts. Tomato leaves. Vicks Vapo Rub. Mum buttered me with that grease every night in winter. I had asthma. The fact I was cooped up in the house all day with 2 smokers probably didn't have anything to do with it. Vapo Rub contains lots of menthol, which causes asthma in some people. Add smoke and dry air, and you have the perfect asthma recipe. There was a particular liquid soap that happened to be gentle on the skin when I reached the early years of puberty. My bathroom times got longer and my skin smelled better. Years later that smell still arouses me a tiny bit. A willy so clean yet so very dirty. Creosote. Primarily wood telephone poles, wood rail cross ties. Smells a little like asphalt, but slightly different. My dad worked 30 years at factories that applied creosote to wood. Some people think it stinks. I think it smells like daddy. I miss him. That smell came up from the railroad's ties I walked on as a child. I know that smell, it's a good hot sunshine smell. Lilacs. I grew up in the north but moved to Florida after I graduated high school. I could swear either that there was a flower that bloomed in the late spring around here that reminded me of lilacs, but everyone tells me lilacs can't grow here. That's disappointing. I remember as a kid when the lilacs were in bloom for those 2 weeks I flat did not want to come inside. I think we need to get all the great botanists of the world together to try to figure out how to grow lilacs in Florida. I cannot accept that it's simply impossible. Lilacs can grow in zone 8, and I'm only about 100 miles in zone 9 to zone 8. Can 100 miles really be the make or break point? Lilacs are my favorite smell ever. We had a huge one in our yard growing up and it would make the whole house smell wonderful when the windows were open. I have a much smaller one at my house now, and when they are blooming, I go out at least twice a day to smell them. The first bit of smoke off of a freshly lit cigarette. Mind you, I do tea smoke, but that smell takes me back to long road trips with my dad. That smell reminds me of bars where bands would play when people used to be able to smoke inside. The smell of warm glue from a hot glue gun reminds me of crafting with my mom, and different thinning agents for oil paints remind me of an artsy angst during my teenagehood. The smell of cold pine trees and snow and Old Spice remind me of walks through the forest as a kid with my grandfather. I also remember the type of sharp oily smell from old bridges in the sun from playing outside with my friends on the train tracks and bridges around their house. They're not exactly pleasant smells on their own, but the evocation is lovely. Oh lordy, hot glue guns make me think of the dressing rooms backstage at my mom's children's theater. Glue guns always on and at the ready. This was during the 90s. Combined stale gas, faint cigarette, black rubber, differential lube, and non-emissions controlled exhaust. There is a very specific combo of these smells that exists in an old auto repair shop, and it is heavenly. Always a special feeling remembering the time losing your virginity. Am I the only one who remembers the smell of the freshly printed ink on papers in elementary school? Like as soon as the teachers passed out the papers I would sniff them to smell the ink. I always loved the warm paper smell from fresh photocopies. Ramps. They grew wild in my neighborhood and we used to pick them and throw them at each other. They smelled like garlicky onions and my mom would always complain about us coming home reeking of onions and garlic. Years later I'm working in fine dining and the chefs are so excited to have ramps. I innocently asked, "You can eat these?" We used to throw them at each other every spring. Chefs looked at me incredulous and outraged. I used to love it when I'd run over a patch when I was mowing the lawn. Running over ramps and the mint that had crept into the yard reminds me of childhood summers I spent at my grandparents' farm. Fire that I can smell but I can't see. We lost nearly everything to a house fire when I was a kid. The few things that made it out never smelled the same. They just smelled like fire. Nothing more humbling than watching everything you own burn to ashes, including your pets, because the owners of the rental property decided it was a total loss. They didn't care about our stuff, just their insurance payout. I remember everything and I don't like it. Frick man, that sucks, but sounds like an interesting book to be honest. Cracker Barrel. Every time I went on a road trip when I was younger we would always stop by one. Even today when I go in one it takes me back to those road trips. And if you've been to a Cracker Barrel, you know it has a smell all of its own. Vintage lipstick. Makes me think of my grandmother. That gasoline and grease combo from a mechanic's shop makes me think of my teenage years. How come I'm never able to identify where it's coming from? I'll make a candle out of it if I ever found it. Try to sell it. Never sell out of it. I'll probably only sell one. It'd be to my brother. Mud reminds me of playing football in the rain back in school. The joy of running and sliding on fields and getting dirty. Thanks. Forgot about the smell and feel of football in the rain and mud. My senior season was 1975, and now I'm having some fond memories. Bleach. Chlorine. Whenever I smell it, it takes me back to long summer days at the pool as a kid. Those were the best times. Another weird one is skunk. Smelling skunk always reminds me of when I lived in Alabama for a few years as a little kid. One could say you were sniffing on straight chlorine. When I was a kid, every summer my parents planted tomato and other plants in pots on our patio. When my dad cooked dinner, he would have me go outside and pick the fruits and herbs we would be eating that night. He passed away when I was 25. I walked into my local grocery store years later and went to the produce section. It was summer and tomatoes were in season. I got a huge whiff of the scent, and without even thinking of anything I ate it up. It caught me so off guard. The smell of fresh tomatoes made me think of my dad. Burnt toast. I would spend time with my great aunt when I was little, and she always made herself a toast for our afternoon snack. It was invariably burnt, charred, and you could smell it from outside her apartment. I never ate the toast, but always had crackers with cream cheese as my snack. I have very fond memories of playing at her place after school. Now whenever I smell burnt toast, I think of her, and I get a sudden craving for cream cheese. Those weird air fresheners that are like purple jelly, I don't know how to describe them better than that, but yeah, that's my grandma's. The basement of my grandma's house in Cincinnati. She has since passed and the house is no longer in the family. I'd always remember climbing down those steep stairs into this dark place that smelled like garage, laundry, alcohol, old people and firewood. I can smell it now. I recall watching Bengals games down there and playing with the trains. 80s and early 90s were a good time. Oh god, this one Febreze smell. I think it's the Hawaiian one. It reminds me of Pokemon Blue the year it came out and how much I played it. On the bus, in class, 3 AM when I was supposed to be asleep. Good times. The smell of burnt rubber. I spent a lot of my childhood at the racetrack with my dad. Also, the perfume London Glam by Rimmel. I had the scented rose petal doll from Rose Petal Place when I was a kid and the perfume strongly reminds me of it. Cinnamon sugar. When I was little, 8 years or so, I would stay with my grandparents on a camping ground on Sylt, an island in Germany, every year. For a couple of weeks during the summer, there was a small crepes stand at the entrance. Every day I got one crepes with sugar and cinnamon. It was glorious. Skunk smell or dead roadkill reminds me of the 3-hour drive we took as kids to my grandma's house in East Texas, especially in the summer. Nag Compa incense. My mom always burned it growing up, and when I got into high school and started smoking weed, I did too. Wait. The smell of bromine. It's a chlorine alternative used at all the Disney parks and makes Pirates of the Caribbean have the specific smell. Anytime I ride that ride it takes me back. The smell of home cooked footlongs. Mom used to prepare us these when I was a kid. One hand holds a PlayStation controller, another with one of it, always during a weekend, on hot afternoons. Sounds greasy, but the feeling was warm and carefree. Kind of wish to go back. 2-cycle engine exhaust. It reminds me of two things in particular. One is when my dad was still alive, but I don't really understand why, because he didn't have 2-cycle things very often. The other is my friend Josh's quad, which he still has to this day, and how much we would all ride around on it. He got it when we were about 12-13ish, and now we're just over 30. Old books, and weirdly enough, dirt. Hear me out now. When I was a kid, the smell of dirt on stairs was fascinating, and anytime I found like a clump of it I would eat it. Don't ask me why, because I don't even know myself. but many years later certain dusts and dirts remind me of being a kid. Tomato plants. The plants have a distinct smell that is different than the tomatoes. It reminds me of helping my grandpa in the garden as a kid. I'll never smell it again, but the scent of a video rental store was special to me. So many memories attached to that one. Now this one is not me personally, but people around me. I smoke a tobacco pipe, usually choosing Prince Albert or Capitan Black pipe tobaccos. Yes, I am aware smoking is bad. Often I have had very old people freeze at estate sales and get closer to me. Every time they're smelling this, usually mixed with my leather jacket, and they tell me stories of their grandfathers, fathers, and husbands. The amount of life stories I've heard and hugs I've given to strangers. Old women almost always request this, is something I think of a lot. There's been enough stories to fill a book, but some are so deep you think about them often. I will never smell this again, but one time I smelled an eraser and it kind of smelled like weird cheese. So, sometimes I think about it and I'm like, oh hey, I remember that pencil eraser smell. The smell of that cheap, nasty gum that used to be included with trading cards. Good for about 3 chews before all the sugar was gone and the gum base either dissolved into a grainy mess or became as tough as an old tire. Takes me right back to middle school. It took me years to realize that my dad always smelled like weed. Now when I smell it I get all these great childhood memories. LOL. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.